Hi everyone, it's Rachel here. I'm here to present your A2 Flipped Collaborate for EDU70007 English in the primary school. Welcome, thanks for listening. This assessment 2 is called the Folio, and it is part 1 or part A of a 2-part folio. So when we have our assessment 3, it's actually the folio part B, and they are obviously connected. But let's focus on folio part A and see what needs to be covered. We have a word count of 1,500 words, give or take 10%. Before we can start though, we always like to do our acknowledgement of country, where we respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land in which Swinburne Australian campuses are located in Melbourne's east and outer east, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So let's have a look at what we need to do in terms of the assignment details and give you a bit of an overview. A lot of your content is going to come from that Seeley Flint text in terms of chapter 9, which gives you an in-depth look at assessment in terms of what assessment is, what assessment means in terms of literacy, and really it's a really good overview on those broad definitions of things like formative assessment, summative assessment, diagnostic assessment, and giving you lots of examples that you can use to fill in the table that you're going to fill in for this assessment. So that's a good starting point. You're also going to connect heavily to the unit reading materials in weeks 4 and 5 in order to be able to both analyse and evaluate assessment strategies. The strong focus of this assessment is really putting on your critical hat, thinking critically rather than just discussing or rather than just presenting ideas. It is a critical evaluation, so you do need to analyse particular assessment strategies both for reading and writing in terms of presenting it in a table, then choosing 2 that you're going to look at in further detail. You'll notice in the assessment details that it breaks it up into task 1 and task 2. Task 1 being your table and task 2 being your critical analysis that you're going to present as if you were a team member presenting to your team at school. You're going to make some suggestions about some assessments that could be viable in terms of literacy learning. So let's have a look at task 1. First port of call is that you're going to read chapter 9. As I mentioned, chapter 9 is a really great overview to give you that sort of heads up into thinking about assessment, telling you about different assessment styles and strategy, giving you examples on what you could potentially add to this table that you're going to fill out. So reading chapter 9 is really important, and engaging with the learning materials in weeks 4 and 5 in particular, as well as any of your own reading or investigation. You are going to choose 3 reading and 3 writing assessments. When you're choosing assessments, I find with literacy assessment in particular that being really explicit can help you to be able to critically analyse a particular resource or a particular assessment tool. When we have a look at the table in the next few slides, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but choosing a specific reading assessment rather than just saying a general term like rubric or a general term like folio, if you can find a particular rubric or a particular checklist, it's much easier to be able to critique a particular assessment when it's sitting in front of you and you can look at a rubric and really break down what kind of skills it's looking for. I find that much easier than just trying to imagine a rubric in my head or imagine some sort of reading checklist. If we just say a general term like checklist, it can be a little bit vague, and I find that it's hard to do a critical analysis when you're being vague or when you don't have a particular checklist or rubric or diagram or whatever it is that you're going to use as your tool, I find it personally easier if I had a specific example in front of me that I could really break down and analyze. That's just a tip. You can still write rubric and writing folio and all of these sorts of things, but my tip is that I would choose a specific one. And then you're going to complete your table, and that involves you listing your 3 reading strategies and your 3 writing strategies, and then going into a little bit of detail about each one. Your table is your overview that then you're going to choose 1 reading and 1 writing assessment from to break down in task 2 even further. So that is your first thing that you can do as of now. Read that chapter and get those assessments chosen early on. Do some Googling around of those assessments as well. Is there a lot of available information? Am I going to be able to find out about torch reading test or probe or past phonemic awareness test? Am I going to be able to find information about these things? Do I want to choose something else? So I would start Googling around about assessments too and just see what information is out there, see what kind of diagnostic testing there is, see what types of formative assessments being used. Have you come across any inner placement that you saw being used that you could use as an example? I know that some students are probably going to ask if you do find a specific example and you want to include it to show Lindsay when he's marking these assessments, then yes, it might be a good idea to, if you're talking about a particular rubric, to maybe include it in an appendix so that we can see exactly which kind of rubric or what kind of checklist it is that you are critiquing. So a big focus of this assessment is completing this table. We have got like a template that you can use in the assessment details, but just remember that you might need to readjust your formatting. This end column here, which is your critical evaluation, is essentially going to be your largest area of the 3. The first 3 is just more of a few short sentences giving a very brief overview, and then your limitations and benefits are really going to be the main crux of what it is you're looking for. And you can understand that because in task 2, you are really going into much more detail about 1 reading and 1 writing assessment. So therefore, you're going to draw on what you've already got in this table. You're going to make some decisions about which 2 assessments you're going to look at in further detail. And this critical evaluation part of that table is really going to help you with that. So in this table, you have what is being assessed. Now with literacy, we're always thinking about particular skills because how can we critique an assessment if we don't know exactly what it is that it's assessing? How can we critique the quality of the data that comes back to us as teachers if we don't really know what skills it is we're looking for? So if we think about it in terms of reading, we have a few main umbrellas of things that it could be covering in terms of a reading assessment. So essentially, it's going to be either a decoding assessment or a comprehension assessment or elements of both. Something like a running record, say a commercially based running record, say something like a Fontes and Pinnell or PM benchmark, you're going to have the decoding side where you do the running record and do that miscue analysis, but there's also comprehension questions. So we can say that it has both of those elements. Try to be as explicit as you can. We will go through this together in the interactive collab and really practice this. It can be very vague, or really if you want to push into those higher grades, which I know you all do, we're really looking for you to say it doesn't just assess comprehension, or it doesn't just assess decoding or reading skills. if we're being vague like that, it's not really giving us a really good insight into what you know about reading. So try and be as explicit as you can. If you are talking about, say, something like a running record, you could tell us that it is the skills that are being assessed is decoding, but it's also looking at that MSV analysis. So you can say that there's the meaning skills, the structural and the visual, and you can link to elements of looking for visual clues like orthographic clues, but also looking for things like, does it make sense in terms of meaning, and then does it make sense in the context of the book? So that is not phonics based. It is not assessing anything to do with phonological awareness, and is not assessing anything to do with phonemic awareness. So we can be quite explicit about what the skills are. Even if it was a comprehension test, does it have a particular flavor to it? Is it assessing vocabulary? Is it assessing inference? Is it assessing visualization? Try and be as explicit as you can. Now, obviously with some, it's just going to be a comprehension. It might be a read and retell. It might be a summary. So try and think about what elements of comprehension it is that you're covering. The same will go with your writing assessments. Try and be really explicit about what kind of writing skills these assessments are going to be covering. And the more explicit you can be about the types of skills that it's covering, that will give you insight into what potentially this assessment is lacking. So when you get down here to your limitations, if you realize, wow, I've realized that phonemic awareness is terribly important in the early years of primary school, but my running record doesn't. When I had a look at skills and I listed my skills of what a running record was assessing, there was no assessment of phonological awareness or phonemic awareness. So that can give you insight into what a potential limitation is. That's why being explicit with skills is so important. Getting back to writing is really going to be broken down into two sort of key areas. So when we think about writing, we're thinking about the mechanics of writing. There'll be things like, paragraphs, sentence structure, complex sentences, simple sentences, punctuation, grammar, all of those. What I just deem like the mechanics of writing, the actual being able to write structurally, grammatically, thinking about those orthographic skills. But on the other hand of writing, which also needs to be assessed, is things like audience, ideas, interesting vocabulary. If it's a narrative, things like, story structure. If it's a persuasive text, they'll be looking for things like persuasive devices. So there's what I deem to be like the mechanics of writing, but there's also the creative elements of writing. And if you have a look at NAPLAN writing, which is actually assessed very well, think about the skills. If you have a look at the NAPLAN Writing Guide, just Google it, NAPLAN Writing Guide 2010, it pops up. And it gives you the whole narrative marking guide, and that's the exact things that they are looking for. They are looking for audience. They are looking for ideas. They are looking for vocab use. They are looking for sentence structure. If it's a persuasive, they'll look for persuasive devices. So these are all the skills that we could be looking for, that we could include in here of what type of skills. So does your writing assessment just assess the mechanics of writing and has very little focus on the creative element? These are all sorts of things that you're going to be thinking about as you fill in your table. We will go into this in much more detail in the interactive collab because I'm going to give you examples of some particular assessments. We'll look at what's being assessed and we'll look at how it's collected, and then have a look at some examples of a critical analysis. You have, how is the data collected? Try to keep that as brief and succinct as possible. You don't need to go into a lot of detail. We know that we've got 900 words to play with in this assessment, as in part 1, task A. We don't want to use it explaining to both myself or Lindsay that you've got like a really, really long paragraph telling us how it's collected. I mean, you can assume a certain level of knowledge from the person who's going to be reading this. So you can give us a couple of like 2 or 3 short sentences saying how the data is collected. So how do you collect it? How is it run? Is it one-on-one? Is it small group? Is it done online? How is it actually conducted as an assessment? What are the rules of that assessment? Does it need to be done one-on-one? Does it need to be done, so frequently, for example? How is the data used by the teacher? Again, this is not a terribly long column, as again, your critical analysis will take up a primary role in this table, but you're going to be labeling whether it's formative, as informative, going to inform your teaching. Again, chapter 9 is a really good overview. You can always Google and look up formative v summative assessment if you still need a bit more of an overview. We'll again talk about it in our interactive collab as well. Like, is it formative, is it summative, and is it diagnostic? So you might come across a lot of diagnostic testing, particularly in reading, because there'll be things like phonological awareness test, Dibel's torch, Burtword, what else was I going to add in? Running records, FMP, probe, all of those sorts of things. There's quite a number of them in reading. So you'll probably come across a fair amount of diagnostic testing in reading. Perhaps not so much with writing. Writing's a little bit more school-based. A lot of teaching teams come up with their own sort of checklists and rubrics, obviously curriculum-based and based on certain elements, but there could be school-level planning that also caters to when teachers do their writing moderation. So we'll talk a bit more in the interactive collab about how the data is used by teachers. Is it used obviously to inform planning, but how is a particular data used? When I've got some examples for you, we can go over that particular column. You have 900 words across your whole table, and you have got your 3 reading and your 3 writing. It is really important when you get to your benefits and limitations that you include references. So we're always backing up, we're always being supportive of the ideas that we're saying, otherwise it becomes just sort of unsubstantiated opinion if you don't use support. So really try to use a reference for each of the ideas that you come up with in this column. I'm going to give you one more suggestion, which I think is important in terms of your benefits and limitations. And I know if I was marking this, what I would be looking for if I was going to be marking, say, perhaps a HD level and how it would vary, say, from a pass or a credit. So, for example, let's have a look at running records, for example. Now, limitation of running records could be that it's one-on-one and it takes a long time. So time consuming seems to be something that people come up with a lot. Now, yes, it certainly is a limitation because teachers are time poor. Other kids are getting distracted in the grade with all of this one-on-one assessment. It takes time. We might have to sit with an hour for a child doing particular running records, say an FMP. So there is the limitation that others are distracted, others are not having quality teacher time because the teacher is taken away by this assessment. However, that's not a really high quality limitation because lots of assessments take time. Lots of assessments are one-on-one and need teacher focus. What would be a higher quality limitation is to really think about the quality of the data that's being produced. So if we think about a running record and the fact that we are getting particular miscues and the fact that we are getting MSV analysis, how does that inform your teaching? How is that actually a benefit to have that information? Or is there anything that perhaps it's lacking? We mentioned before that a running record doesn't give you insight into phonological awareness. That would be a better limitation than saying it takes a long time to do, or it needs a lot of photocopying, or if my internet drops out, I can't do my assessment. They're all external things that can happen to any test. But what we really want to look at is when we've got the data in front of us, what's good about it? If I've got a writing rubric sitting in front of me, and the first column analyzes punctuation and the second column analyzes sentence structure, and the next column analyzes whether the child has used paragraphs, I can look at that rubric and I can say, where are the ideas? Where's the audience? Where's the story structure? Where's the development of characters? So really the rubric has touched on the mechanics of writing, but it's very poorly touched on the creative aspects of writing. That would be a better limitation than saying this rubric took time to photocopy. Or, a benefit could be that it was available on Twinkle. Like those sorts of things are, yes, definitely benefits and limitations, but are your benefits and limitations really high quality ones that you're showing us that you have insight into this assessment. So if you're going to tell us that it took a long time to photocopy, that's not really a high quality limitation. So think about them, which ones you're going to include, and obviously we'll give you lots of examples at the interactive collab. So in a little bit more detail, we've got your writing assessment is going to be, say, number 1, and you're going to list it. Then you're going to have your dot points of what is being assessed. Be really explicit about naming the particular skills. How the data is collected is a brief explanation of how the assessment is administered. How is it done? And how is student data recorded? So how is it conducted and how is that data then written down? We need to monitor that data. How is it used? We're going to consider future planning. We're going to consider reporting. Now, reporting, our mind always is going to go to parents when we think about reporting because we assume it's reporting to parents. But for this assessment, we really need to think quite broadly about what the term reporting means. Does it mean reporting to the student? Does it mean reporting to colleagues in the school? Does it mean reporting to leadership? Does it mean reporting to parents? Does it mean reporting to external stakeholders? So if I have a rubric that is a rating, peer monitored rubric or self-assessment even, the reporting could be that you're going to report it back to the student themselves. If I have a moderation where everyone in my PLT has written a narrative, the reporting element is going to be sitting in your PLT team and talking, having that narrative story in front of you, having the rubric, and chatting about it as a collegiate team to make learning goals for the cohort. That is going to be the element of reporting there. Are we giving feedback? Are we using it for differentiation? Are we using it for flexible student groupings? Over here, we got your benefits and limitations area. These are just some things to consider. Perhaps you can have in front of you as you're starting to think about your benefits and limitations. It says, is it ongoing? Is it authentic? Is it part of a learning team? Can it be differentiated? How does it improve learning? But also, I'd really like you to think about that quality of the data. What's the data that is being produced by this assessment? Because essentially, there could be 10 assessments that all focus on reading comprehension, say for upper school. Imagine we were going to choose one of those to actually conduct on our kids, and we always talk about being time poor, and we always talk about having effective assessment, but why would we choose that particular assessment over another one? What's the real crux of the benefits and limitations? Is it going to inform our teaching so that we can then put those kids into groups, that we can then use that to drive whatever their next stage of their learning is? The other thing that's really important here is that you make sure you use literature. They can't just be ideas of your own. They need to be supported by some sort of academic evidence. So that's really important. Task 2 is following on from your table. You are going to imagine yourself that you are going to address some senior staff in the school. You are going to use either first or third person. It is a formal still academic writing. Imagine yourself that you're presenting this information. It still needs to be academically based. You're obviously going to have your resources referenced with different theory and academic research, and this is going to be worth 600 words. You are going to be choosing one reading and one writing strategy that you're going to then take from the table and then present it in, just think of it as an extension on what you've already started. So why should these be implemented across the school? So if we're going to invest money, invest time, invest teacher training in all of these things, but why should we put our effort and training and invest time in a particular assessment? Obviously, a school's not going to take on an assessment lightly, and they put a lot of thought into which assessments they want in their assessment program. So choose one reading, choose one writing from your table that you're going to then expand on, and you're going to evaluate how and why these strategies could inform teachers' reporting of student achievement in English. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So the criteria that you're going to be marked against says that you've got an understanding of the practice of assessment in English, primary English. That means that you should be able to make suitable choices. So we obviously can see that you've got an assessment that's relevant to reading or writing, and both in that table at the beginning. You've got a knowledge of how they're implemented. You've got an understanding of how the data was collected and how the data is going to be used. All of those are covered in task 1 in your table. Criteria 2 is the part 2, your evaluation. You're going to identify those benefits and limitations. Go back to the table and look what you already have there that could be expanded upon and explained in a few paragraphs. We want those really good quality benefits and limitations. So rather than saying Pat R comprehension is no good because if the internet drops out, then the Pat R can't be used, that's not a great limitation. Pat R focuses on comprehension. It is a multiple choice comprehension assessment. You should be looking at the quality of the data that Pat R produces rather than just focusing on that assessment costs $300 and it's expensive. Okay, so really think about the data that's being produced. Produce appropriate strategies for a school-wide assessment and reporting. So you're going to talk about how it could potentially fit in with a school-wide approach to assessment. So something like a Fontes and Pinnell or something like a Probe can often be quite popular amongst particular schools because they can be implemented across grade levels. So say something like an FNP. I know at my son's school is used from prep to grade 3, and then Probe takes over from there for the middle to upper school. Consider how the assessment process and data are beneficial. So you're really going to be focusing on that quality of data. If you have something like a phonological awareness screening test, the benefit of that data is that it tells you the phonological awareness steps that each child has taken and where they're up to. So if we think about phonological awareness being that umbrella term, thinking about things like syllables, onset and rhyme and alliteration, they are the first things that you are assessed on in that test. And it's sequential, so that you can then move the kids onto phonemic awareness, such as segmentation and deletion of phonemes. Consider how limitations might be overcome. So if you are going to say that a running record does not assess phonemic awareness, and the reading research shows that phonemic awareness is the most important part of early reading data, how could this be overcome? Build a strong argument based on evidence, and you're going to consider all of those stakeholders and methods of reporting. We will give you some more examples of this in your interactive collab. Criteria 3 is focused on academic writing, so it's really important that you do use appropriate academic writing and really think about your structure, your reference list. This is all part of the criteria that you're being marked against. So if you have got an amazingly structured reference list, then that's just going to be some easy marks to you towards your final grade. Just some last tips. Just remember that your table needs 3 reading and 3 writing. You're going to have task 1, which is the table, and task 2, which is where you're going to choose 2 assessments from that first table and look at them in depth. Good luck. We're going to see you again in the interactive collab.